quick questions out of that. Two, when you say offsets, I'm hearing cap and trade in my head. Is it the same language, or is there a different thing going on here? But I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. And the second thing is my observation that $74 million is a lot of money for policy development. And I realize he was kind of skipping through his list, so I would ask if you can provide the list of exactly what gets broken out under each of those votes. And he was giving me a kind of quick list, but I would appreciate the thorough list. If it can be provided to me through the chair of the committee, that would be, no, through the chair, through whoever is supposed to get it, and then it comes to me. I guess you table it. I would appreciate that. So that's the sort of cleanup from the last one. Now I'm going to go on. The next is the focus on the oil sands and water monitoring, and we've had a lot of panels. We had the Schindler report, which the government initially started to discredit Dr. Schindler about, and then quickly met with him to compare science, I think was the language that was being used. And from that we had the provincial panel of Water Monitoring Data Review Committee. That was provincial panel number 1, and it reported. Provincial panel number 2 was a second panel to determine a new monitoring system in the oil sands, and that's the one that I was talking about in question period today. So that's the water, I don't remember the name of that one, the water monitoring something. Foundation for the Future, building an environmental monitoring system for the oil sands. Oh no, that's the federal one, sorry. This is why this just gets so confusing. So there's the monitoring one that's reporting, and from which you've lost 2 members. That's provincial panel number 2. You've got federal panel number 1, which was the oil sands, the one set up by the former federal minister, Jim Prentice. And it found that essentially there wasn't a clear, equitable measure-to-measure monitoring system in the region. And then we had wildcard panel number 1, which is the Royal Society of Canada Expert Panel, Environmental and Health Impacts of Canada's Oil Sands Industry, which had more or less the same sort of response, that current evidence was insufficient, regulatory capacity is weak, Alberta faces major potential liabilities as a result of weak financial security practices, that there are valid concerns with RAMP, the Regional Aquatics Monitoring Program, and that the environmental impact assessment process is deficient. And they have a long quote in here about they've identified deficiencies in environmental assessment practices compared with international best practice guidance from guidelines promoted by Canadian agencies, international agencies, and industrial associations. Notably, there's a whole list of them there. Notably, there has generally been inadequate overall risk assessment for technological and natural disasters, assessment of community health impacts, negative and positive, integrated and cumulative ecological impact assessment, and assessment of regional socio-economic impacts. And then we had provincial panel number 3, which was the Regional Aquatics Monitoring System, which reported on this past January, 8 weeks ago or so. So 3 different panels. And so now I'm going to look under the estimates on page 142, but also the ministry business plans on page 57 and, hang on, 57 and 58. And I think I also referenced page 42 of the fiscal plan. Yeah, okay. So this is the one where $17 million was provided in this year, which is an increase of $3 million over the previous year, or the 21% that the minister mentioned. Sounds grander when the minister says it, because he says 21%, and not so grand when I say it, because I say $3 million. But and that this new, recently appointed environmental monitoring panel will provide the recommendations by June. So I'm taking it that this is this water monitoring one. My question is, why isn't one of the priority initiatives that's listed in the ministry business plan for 2011-14 to develop and implement a science-based monitoring system for Alberta oil sands? I expected to see that as part of the language that is being put forward, and I expected to see it to back up the ministry's shift in messaging around monitoring. And the closest thing that I see is the priority initiative in the business plan of priority 1.2, which is contribute to building an integrated information monitoring, reporting and knowledge system. Not quite what I expected. The performance measurements, on the other hand, which appear on page 58, reads water quality. Oh yeah, this is the one I want to know about. The water quality of 6 major Alberta rivers at key sites based on monthly data on 4 groups of variables, which are averaged to provide an overall water quality rating. And it is suggested that the last actual, which was for 08-09, saw good to excellent water quality in 6 out of 6 river systems. So my questions are, what 6 rivers are tracked under this performance measurement? 2, how is the water tested? In other words, what's it tested for and how's it done? 3, I'm interested, if one of the rivers is the Athabasca, how can the results that were being produced from that, I'm going to push on how that could be trusted, given that we have heard over and over again in the last couple of months that what the information that was being produced by the government panels did not account for certain things that are being accounted for elsewhere. So I'm going to stop talking and let the minister answer those questions for me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin by having a brief discussion over the remarks made by the member that suggests that I was attempting to discredit Dr. Schindler and his report. I don't agree with that observation. What I did point out was that there is a disagreement on the interpretation of facts, and that I had indicated that our reporting and our monitoring was indicating that we were maintaining a good quality of water in the river, and that really leads into the final remarks. That's why I asked a panel to have a look at the work, the ongoing science based on Alberta environment and our historical data, and the science that Drs. Kelly and Schindler did. And the conclusion that that panel came to was that, in fact, there is good science in both camps, but that the science.
The first 20 minutes, so continue on, Minister.
But that the science was designed perhaps to do different things. And they said that the work that Dr. Schindler did indicated that there could be deposition from snow, which would be airborne deposition, but there were a number of assumptions that had been made to draw the conclusion that the samples that they found in very isolated, small number of samples of snow would then equate to a significant impact on the river, and they said that they didn't necessarily agree that conclusion could be made. But they also reaffirmed what Dr. Schindler had shown, was that if there is these airborne depositions that are ending up in the river, they're in very small quantities and so small that the monitoring that goes on does not measure them. And so that's how we get into this dichotomy where you have on one hand someone saying that we have good quality, and on the other hand someone saying, well, we have evidence to indicate that there is something to be concerned about. So that's the reason why we are now in the process of reviewing our monitoring system so that we can understand whether or not at some point in time these very small depositions could be entering our water system, perhaps our water entering our water system, and if so, what do we need to do? What are the kinds of actions that we would take from a management perspective to deal with it? The panel also pointed out that it's important that we not only identify and quantify the quality of water, but that we have more emphasis in the monitoring and science on determining whether or not that is causing adverse effect on the environment, particularly from an overall biodiversity perspective. And so that's why we are developing a program right now that is designed to incorporate all the various media, land, water, air, as well as biodiversity, because at the end of the day, really, it's the health of and the relative well-being from a biodiversity perspective that tells us whether or not we are adequately protecting the environment and we have appropriate mechanisms in place. Now, the member asked which rivers we monitor. The 6 rivers: the North Saskatchewan, South Saskatchewan, Athabasca, Bow, and Old Man. And as I indicated, that the testing that we have been doing has indicated that from all independent kinds of standards that are set for water, our rivers are in that good to excellent category. That is true. There are. I think there's probably a good chance that when the numbers come out for next year, we will find, particularly in the South Saskatchewan, where we saw a flooding event take place last year, that the turbidity in that river will probably be enhanced, and so we may not be able to say next year that 6 out of 6. We may find that it maybe will drop to 5 out of 6 because of the amount of sediment that's washed down with these flood events, and that turbidity then will take some time to settle down in the river basin. So that's the nature of this performance measure. Let me say that as we move towards cumulative effects, and as we start to put in place much more rigid triggers and limits into the water management system through our Alberta Land Stewardship, and we'll see soon the numbers that have been arrived at for the lower Athabasca region. These kinds of performance measures will in all likelihood change, and they'll become much more specific as to whether or not we are meeting the expectations and we are appropriately taking action as various triggers are reached or approached. And I would think that the performance measures, particularly in my department, will become much more meaningful in the future than perhaps what they've been in the past.
Okay.